The theater was already awake long before the sun rose. The lights inside were dim, casting long shadows across rows of empty red seats. Dust floated gently in the air, visible only when it passed through the narrow beams of light above the stage. On that wide wooden floor, a man pushed a broom slowly from one end to the other. Each stroke was careful, steady, almost quiet enough to blend into the silence of the room. He had been doing this same job for years, sweeping the stage, cleaning the aisles, wiping down seats after crowds had left behind popcorn crumbs, muddy footprints, and forgotten programs. Most people who came to the theater never noticed him. If they did, it was only for a second. The way someone notices a chair or a wall, something that was simply there, part of the background. He didn't mind, at least. That's what he told himself. He wore the same faded work jacket every morning. The sleeves were slightly too long, and the zipper stuck halfway unless pulled just right. His shoes were worn, the soles thin from too many hours on hard floors. He moved with a quiet rhythm, knowing every corner of the building like it was his own home. This theater was old. It had hosted concerts, talent shows, charity events, and once, long ago, famous performers who now lived only in framed photos on the walls. The man had seen all of it, not from the stage, but from the shadows. He cleaned up after applause faded. He erased the marks left behind by spotlights. He worked while others slept or celebrated. Most days, no one spoke to him beyond a quick nod or a short request. "Can you clean this up? Or make sure the stage is clear by noon?" The words were not unkind, just distant, professional, forgettable. He arrived early because it paid a little extra. More hours meant more money, and more money meant keeping the lights on at home. It meant food in the fridge. It meant school supplies, shoes that fit, and the quiet comfort of knowing his child would not go without. Being a single father had taught him how to plan every dollar and every minute. There was no backup, no one else to pick up the slack if he got sick or tired. He carried that weight every day, but rarely showed it. He had learned to keep his worries tucked away, folded neatly like the cleaning rags in his cart. At home, mornings were rushed. Breakfast was simple. Sometimes toast, sometimes cereal, sometimes whatever could be made fast before the school bus arrived. He packed lunches carefully, always checking twice to make sure nothing was forgotten. After the door closed behind his child, he stood still for a moment, listening to the silence. Then he grabbed his jacket and headed to work. In the theater, time moved differently. Hours passed without much change. The same stage, the same broom, the same quiet echo of his footsteps. He liked that part of the job. The calm, the predictability. Life outside was loud and uncertain. Inside these walls, he knew what to expect. Still, there were moments when the quiet felt heavy. As he swept, his eyes sometimes drifted toward the center of the stage. That was where the lights shone brightest during performances. That was where people stood when they wanted to be seen, heard, remembered. He had never stood there when the seats were full, only when the room was empty, when no one was watching. Against the far wall sat a grand piano, black, polished, and expensive looking. Most days it was covered, protected like something fragile and important. It belonged to the theater, reserved for performers who arrived in pressed clothes and left to applause. He passed it every day without touching it. He told himself he didn't need to others. He was just the man with the broom, the one who opened doors early and locked them late, the one who knew where every trash bin was kept and which light switches worked best. They didn't know his story, and they never asked. They didn't know how much effort it took for him to keep going. On his break, he sat alone near the back row. He ate quietly, unwrapping his lunch as softly as possible, as if afraid to disturb the space. Sometimes he looked at the stage while he ate. Sometimes he looked at his hands that were rough from work, knuckles marked with small scars from years of labor. Those hands had done many things: fixed broken chairs at home, tied shoelaces, washed dishes late at night, held on to hope when things felt impossible. He checked his phone often, not for messages from friends, there were few of those left, but for updates, a school notice, a reminder, a simple "I'm home" text later in the day that always made him breathe a little easier. People talked about dreams as if they were optional, like hobbies that could be picked up and put down. He knew better. He had learned that dreams didn't disappear just because life demanded something else. They waited, quietly, sometimes painfully, but no one saw that part of him. When the theater started to fill later in the day, he stayed out of the way. He moved along the edges, collecting trash, wiping spills, keeping everything ready for the show. Performers walked past him, focused and nervous. Staff rushed around with clipboards and headsets. No one stopped to ask about him, and he didn't stop them. There was a kind of safety in being invisible. No expectations, no pressure, just work. Yet sometimes, when music filled the room during rehearsals, he paused, just for a second, long enough to feel something stir inside his chest, long enough to remember that he was more than his job description. He never talked about it, not at work, not at home. His child knew him as a caring father, a tired father, a dependable one. That was enough, he believed. Wanting more felt selfish when so much already depended on him. As the day went on, he finished sweeping the stage, gathering the last bits of dust into a neat pile. He leaned on the broom for a moment, stretching his back. The theater was quiet again, the calm before another rush. He looked around the empty seats, the lights, the stage, a place full of voices, yet somehow lonely when no one was there. He took a deep breath and returned the broom to the corner, ready to move on to the next task. To anyone watching, he was just a single dad doing his job, a man trying to make ends meet, a worker blending into the background. No one could have guessed that beneath the worn jacket and quiet routine lived a story, still waiting to be heard. He often thought about how life had brought him here, to the quiet corners of a theater no one noticed. But there had been a time when he believed he would never end up sweeping floors, or moving through shadows. Once, long ago, music had been everything. Every day had been filled with the sound of keys under his fingers, the rise and fall of melodies he could create effortlessly. He had dreamed of stages, bright lights, applause, of a life where he could live entirely in music. He had started learning the piano as a child. At first, it was just curiosity, a way to make noise, to play with the sounds his small hands could reach. But soon, it became more than that. Music was a voice he could use when words failed. Every emotion, every thought, seemed to flow best through the black and white keys. His teacher had told him he had a gift, that if he practiced and focused, the world would notice. For a while, the world had noticed. He played in school concerts, small competitions, and local gatherings. People came to listen, their faces attentive, their eyes soft with appreciation. He felt alive in those moments. The applause at the end of a piece felt like sunlight after a long winter. Every note he played carried a part of him, and people responded as if they understood exactly what he had poured into it. But life had a way of reshaping plans, of asking for sacrifices that seemed impossible at first. His dreams were not destroyed suddenly, not violently, but quietly, day by day. His parents had died when he was young, leaving him with responsibility and a child to care for. Money was scarce. The little he earned playing in small shows was not enough to cover rent, food, and school expenses. Every opportunity to pursue music professionally seemed to vanish under the weight of bills and obligations. He worked multiple jobs to keep the household afloat. He cleaned houses, delivered packages, repaired broken appliances. Every spare moment he had was filled with work, errands, and planning for the next day. There was no time for the piano, for rehearsals, for competitions. His music was forced into silence. The keys gathered dust. His scores lay forgotten in a corner of the room. Yet he never abandoned them entirely. Every night, after the world had gone quiet, he would sit and hum melodies under his breath. Sometimes he would tap the keys gently, just enough to remember what it felt like to create something beautiful. Being a single parent made the sacrifices feel heavier, more permanent. His child depended on him completely, and he could not risk chasing dreams that might not pay the bills. He had to be practical, to think beyond himself. He had learned to smile when tired, to laugh when he was exhausted, and to hide the frustration in quiet moments. Every day was a balancing act, and every evening he felt the weight of responsibility pressing him down. Despite the exhaustion, he never let his child see his discouragement. He knew that a child's world was shaped by what they could see and feel. He wanted to be a source of comfort, not disappointment. So he told stories, played simple games, and celebrated small victories. The piano at home remained untouched, a silent witness to what had been and what might never be again. But it was there, and sometimes that was enough. Even in the theater, where he spent his days unnoticed, the memory of music lingered. When rehearsals ran late and he was clearing the stage, he would sometimes hear the faint echoes of performers practicing. The sound would reach him, and for a brief moment, he felt part of something larger, something he had lost. He listened to the singers, the instrumentalists, the delicate notes that floated through the hall. He imagined the music as threads, weaving a tapestry he could touch if only he dared. Sometimes, He imagined himself on that stage again. He could see the audience, rows of faces watching intently, the soft glow of stage lights reflecting on polished wood. He imagined the applause, the warm feeling of recognition. But then reality would return, the broom in his hand, the dust on the floor, the silent theater round him, and he would push the thoughts aside. The life he had built could not be paused, and dreams could not be bought with hope alone. He often wondered if anyone could understand the tension of living in two worlds at once, the world of duty and the world of desire. He had grown used to hiding pieces of himself, to keeping the past locked behind quiet smiles. Music was not gone. It was a shadow, always there, always waiting. Sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, he would hum a melody, letting it slip out for just a few seconds. It was private, intimate, like sharing a secret with the air. One day, while cleaning the theater after a rehearsal, he paused near the grand piano. The cover had been left slightly open, revealing polished keys that glimmered in the faint light. His fingers itched to touch them. He shook his head, telling himself it was foolish. He had no right to play. It was not his stage, not his performance. Yet the temptation was strong. The memory of long hours spent practicing, of notes that once came alive under his hands, tugged at him insistently. He stood there for a long time, leaning on his broom, watching the piano as if it might speak to him. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic outside. He remembered lessons, recitals, the way music had shaped him when he was young. Each note had been a story, each chord a piece of his soul. And now, here it was, waiting for him to remember. That evening, he went home as usual. Dinner was simple, stories were told, homework was done. Yet even as he tucked his child into bed, his mind lingered on the piano. He thought about the way music could move people, the way it could communicate things that words could not. He realized that he had spent so long hiding his gift, thinking it was too late, that he had forgotten how much it meant to him. The next morning, he arrived at the theater earlier than usual. The sun had not yet risen, and the air smelled faintly of dust and old wood. The stage was empty. He began his usual tasks, sweeping carefully, wiping down surfaces, arranging chairs, but his eyes kept drifting toward the piano. It was as if it had become a magnet, drawing him in with an invisible pull. He hesitated. No one was around. He could sit, even for a moment, and remember. He approached it slowly, each step measured. His hands hovered over the keys. The cold surface felt familiar, almost like an old friend greeting him after years apart. He closed his eyes and let a memory surface, the feel of the keys, the sound of a melody, the way music could fill a room completely. He whispered softly to himself, just one song. It was a promise, a small indulgence, a bridge between the past and the present. As his fingers touched the keys, the notes came hesitantly at first, unsure, searching, but soon, they found their rhythm. The sound was quiet at first, almost secretive, like a confession, and then it grew, swelling with the emotion he had carried for so long. Every chord, every note, told a story of struggle, sacrifice, and unspoken longing. It was a language only he knew, but somehow, it felt universal. He did not notice the time passing. He did not hear footsteps approaching. He was lost in the music, transported to a place where the weight of life could be carried gently by sound. It had been years since he had felt so alive, so connected to himself and the world. The piano sang, and through it, he sang too. The sound eventually drew the attention of a few people in the theater. Staff and performers paused, listening. Their eyes widened as they realized who was playing. It was the janitor, the man everyone walked past without a second thought, playing with skill and emotion that rivaled trained professionals. They could not speak, could not move. The music held them captive, and in that moment, the world had shifted. He played for as long as he could, pouring everything he had into the room. When the final note lingered and faded, he sat back, breathless. The theater was still quiet, except now there was a new energy, a sense of awe and wonder. He did not yet see the faces staring at him, the disbelief and admiration, but he felt it in the way the air seemed to vibrate with what had just happened. When he finally stood, hands trembling slightly from the intensity, he realized that something had changed. He had crossed a line he had long feared, embraced a part of himself he thought had been lost. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility that life could be more than survival, that dreams could exist alongside duty, and that he was still capable of greatness, even if it was hidden in plain sight. And for the first time, he understood that being a father, being responsible, and being true to his own passion did not have to be separate. They could coexist, quietly, beautifully, in the same life. He left the piano with a promise to return, knowing that this small act of courage, this simple indulgence, could be the beginning of something extraordinary. He returned to sweeping, wiping, and arranging, but the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. The room, the stage, the piano, it was no longer just a place of work. It was a place of possibility. And somewhere deep inside, he smiled, realizing that the story of his life was far from over. The next morning, he arrived at the theater with a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of winter on the wind. He carried his usual cleaning supplies, but could hardly focus on the routine tasks. His mind kept drifting to the piano, to the music that had returned to him like a forgotten friend, and to the thought of whether anyone would even notice if he played again. As he pushed the broom across the stage, he found himself glancing at the piano more often than the floor. It sat there, glossy and inviting, waiting silently. For a long moment, he just stood, hands gripping the broom, staring at the polished keys. He wondered if he was imagining the possibility of returning to something he had thought lost forever. Yet, deep inside, he knew the pull was real, and it had grown stronger since the night before. He set the broom aside and ran his hand over the smooth surface of the piano. The touch felt electric, almost as if it was awakening a part of him that had been asleep for too long. He hesitated, listening to the quiet of the empty theater. No one had arrived yet. No one could see him. He closed his eyes and let himself remember the feeling of pressing down on the keys, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful, the way music had once carried his soul. Finally, he sat down, placing his fingers gently on the keys. At first, he played slowly, almost cautiously. Each note was deliberate, each chord a question. Could this still work? Could he still do this after all these years? The answer came quickly. The music flowed, hesitant at first, then with more confidence, more certainty. It was as if no time had passed at all. The notes carried the weight of his life, the struggles and sacrifices, the nights of worry, and the small joys that had kept him going. He did not notice the sound of footsteps behind him at first. A stagehand had arrived early to check equipment and was quietly observing him from the doorway. Another staff member lingered nearby, unsure if they should interrupt or stay hidden. But no one moved. They were captivated by the music, drawn in by something they could not explain. The sound was familiar yet profound, carrying emotion that words could not touch. As the melody grew, others began to trickle into the theater. Performers arriving for morning rehearsals paused in the aisles, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. Some held their instruments, uncertain whether they should continue practicing or wait. The music was different from anything they had heard. It was skillful, precise, yet deeply human. Every note seemed to speak of life itself, its hardships, its hopes, and the quiet strength required to carry on. The man was completely absorbed in the piano. His back was straight, shoulders relaxed, and his eyes occasionally closed as he lost himself in the flow. He felt a sense of release that he had not known for years. The worries of bills, schedules, and responsibilities melted away, replaced by something far more profound: connection. Through the music, he connected to himself, to the past he had never forgotten, and to an audience that was discovering him for the first time. The staff and performers were no longer hidden. They had moved closer, forming a semicircle around the piano. Some leaned against chairs, some crouched by the stage edge, all silently watching. No one dared to speak, afraid that the sound would vanish if interrupted. They had come to the theater expecting a normal morning, routine rehearsals, and work. Instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary, something unexpected. When the first person recorded a few seconds on their phone, the man remained unaware. He played not for recognition or applause, but because it had become a need, a calling he could no longer deny. Each chord, each trill of the keys, told a story of patience and endurance. His music carried a narrative built from the simplest of emotions: love, responsibility, longing, and courage. It resonated in the empty corners, filled the seats, and reached the ceiling, touching everyone who heard it. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. He did not notice time. He did not notice the growing audience or the silent awe surrounding him. He was present only in the moment, immersed in the flow of sound and memory. The music was no longer just a skill he possessed. It was a reflection of his life. Every mistake he had made, every challenge he had faced, every sleepless night, all of it was embodied in the melody. By the time he finished the piece, a hush filled the theater. The echoes lingered longer than usual, as if the room itself was reluctant to let go of the sound. He opened his eyes and noticed the faces around him. Shock and admiration were written clearly in their expressions. Some had tears glistening in the corners of their eyes. Others simply stared, frozen by what they had witnessed. For the first time, he saw the man he had always been, the talented musician. The passionate performer reflected in their reactions. A small, quiet clap broke the silence, followed by another, and then more. Within moments, the entire audience of staff and early rivals erupted into applause. The man jumped slightly, surprised and embarrassed. He had not expected recognition. In fact, he had feared it. But now, standing there with the piano before him, he realized something had changed. The theater had become a stage not only for music, but for his truth. And people were seeing him, really seeing him. For the first time, someone approached him. An older staff member who had known him for years. "I had no idea," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea you could do this." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. It was validation, not of his job, but of his identity, his talent, his life story. He smiled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Words felt inadequate. Music had always been easier to express than speech. News of the performance spread quickly. Staff members whispered to each other, performers told friends, and soon, a small group of regular visitors arrived to see the man who had been hiding in plain sight. Some had never paid attention to him before. Now they could not look away. They watched as he played, as though seeing him move his hands across the keys revealed a new layer of reality, a world where dedication and talent could coexist, where perseverance could yield moments of wonder. Even in the quietest of lives, the man continued to play throughout the morning, each piece different from the last. Some were gentle and reflective, full of longing and subtlety. Others were powerful, full of energy and hope, showing the full range of his skill. He played not for fame or recognition, but because it had become impossible not to. Music had always been part of him, and now it was reclaiming its place. At one point, a performer, holding a violin, quietly joined him. They played together, creating a harmony neither had expected. The sound was richer, more layered, and the collaboration brought joy to both. Others joined in as well, small instruments adding texture and depth. It was spontaneous, beautiful, and unscripted. The theater, once quiet and predictable, had become alive, filled with sound, emotion, and possibility. Through it all, he remained grounded. He did not let the admiration overwhelm him, nor did he seek it. He simply played, fully present, fully engaged, fully himself. The audience responded with quiet attention, not just because of skill, but because of honesty. They were witnessing a life poured into music, a story of resilience, sacrifice, and hidden talent finally finding expression. By midday, the crowd had grown. People who had come to work or attend rehearsals lingered, unable to leave. The janitor had become the center of attention, not because he wanted it, but because he deserved it. He had been invisible for so long, and now, for the first time, he was undeniable. People were listening, really listening, to the sound of a life lived with quiet courage. After one final piece, he paused, breathless but exhilarated. The room erupted in applause, cheers, and laughter. Some people approached him hesitantly, unsure if they should interrupt or if he would welcome the attention. They wanted to know his story, to understand the journey that had led him to this moment. And slowly, as he looked around at the faces, he began to tell it. He spoke quietly at first, about childhood dreams, about the piano, about the sacrifices he had made for his child. He spoke about the years of work, the quiet nights, the moments when he felt like giving up. He did not embellish, did not dramatize. He simply spoke the truth, and in that truth, people found inspiration. They saw a man who had lived life fully, not in grand gestures, but in steady, courageous persistence. By the end of the morning, something had shifted. The theater itself seemed changed. The man who had once been just a janitor, a background figure, had revealed himself as an artist, a storyteller, and a human being of remarkable depth. The staff, performers, and early audience members carried with them a memory they would not forget. They had witnessed a quiet miracle, a life transformed by courage, honesty, and the power of music. And as he finally stood to return to his usual tasks, hands still tingling from the piano, he understood something profound. He had found a bridge between the life he had been living and the life he had once dreamed of. The stage, the keys, and the music were no longer distant, unreachable things. They were part of him, and he could carry them forward, even alongside the responsibilities that defined his days. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter, one in which he no longer had to hide. He had shown the world and, more importantly, himself what he was truly capable of, and while challenges remained, while bills and responsibilities would never dissap. The story did not stay inside the theater for long. A few staff members had quietly recorded the man playing the piano, and within hours, the video had begun to circulate. At first, it was shared among colleagues, whispers of disbelief and awe passing from one person to another. "Did you see him play? He's the janitor." The words seemed impossible, yet the video proved it true. His hands moved across the keys with a skill and passion that most professionals could only dream of. People were captivated. Soon, the video found its way online. Social media picked it up quickly. Viewers from around the world watched as a single father, unnoticed for years, revealed his extraordinary talent. Comments poured in, amazement, admiration, inspiration. People were moved not only by the music, but by the story behind it. A man who had spent his life taking care of his child, who had sacrificed his dreams to meet daily responsibilities, was suddenly being recognized for something truly remarkable. At the theater, life began to change. Visitors arrived earlier, hoping to catch a glimpse of the janitor who could play the piano like a professional musician. Staff members who had once passed him without a second thought now greeted him with smiles, nods, and whispered congratulations. Performers treated him differently too, showing respect and curiosity, asking questions, and even requesting lessons or tips. The world he had occupied quietly for so long was opening up to him in ways he had never imagined. Yet he remained cautious. He had learned the hard way that life could be unpredictable. Praise was new, and attention was unfamiliar. He did not seek it, and he did not fully trust it. He continued to arrive early, sweep the stage, wipe down the seats, and follow his routine. But now, the piano no longer felt like a temptation to be denied. It felt like an invitation to reclaim a part of himself he had thought lost forever. The first time someone asked him to play for a small audience, he hesitated. The request came from a local school group who wanted to hold a special performance. He had never played in front of children before, outside of lessons long ago, but something inside him said yes. When he performed, he saw the children's eyes light up, their hands clapping in wonder. Their excitement reminded him of his own early days, of the joy and freedom music had once brought. For the first time in years, he felt fully alive. Word spread beyond the theater and the small school audience. Local news outlets picked up the story, intrigued by the combination of talent and humility. They interviewed him in his small apartment, showing images of the modest space he shared with his child. The contrast between his life and his talent struck people deeply. They were moved by his dedication, the sacrifices he had made, and the quiet strength that had allowed him to endure years of hardship without losing his humanity. He never imagined that his story could touch so many people. Messages poured in from strangers, some sharing their own struggles, others simply expressing admiration. Many wrote about how his music inspired them, how it reminded them that dreams could survive even in the most difficult circumstances. For him, it was overwhelming but also heartening. He had lived in the shadows for so long, and now, finally, there were people who saw him not just as a janitor, not just as a single father, but as a human being with a story, a gift, and a purpose. Despite the attention, he remained grounded. His child was still his priority, and every decision he made had to include that responsibility. He scheduled performances carefully, ensuring that nothing interfered with school, meals, or routines. Yet, even in this new chapter, he felt a sense of freedom he had not experienced for years. Music was no longer a secret. It was part of his life again, growing alongside him rather than competing with his duties. At the theater, the staff began to adjust as well. They recognized the importance of supporting him without changing who he was. Some organized small recitals. Others encouraged him to practice and play freely before rehearsals. Performers who had once ignored him now watched respectfully, sometimes asking questions or seeking guidance. Even the director of the theater, a figure who had barely noticed him before, now spoke to him with warmth and admiration. The balance of work and recognition began to shift subtly, giving him room to breathe, to explore, and to share. One afternoon, a visiting musician approached him, curious after seeing the video online. The musician was skilled, with years of experience, and wanted to meet the man whose playing had captured so many hearts. They spoke quietly at first, exchanging words about music, technique, and inspiration. Soon, they began playing together, improvising and exploring new pieces. The collaboration was magical. The sound was richer, more layered, alive with possibility. For the first time in a long while, He felt a sense of community and shared purpose that he had been missing for years. The public's fascination with his story continued to grow. Local newspapers and online platforms shared updates about him, focusing not just on his music but on his life. People were inspired by his ability to balance parenthood, work, and talent, seeing him as a symbol of perseverance and resilience. Invitations for interviews, small performances, and even charitable events began to arrive. He approached each one with careful thought, always mindful of his child, but also feeling a quiet excitement that he had not felt in decades. Despite the growing attention, he remained humble. He never forgot the years of quiet work, the nights spent worrying, the moments when he had doubted whether he would ever play again. Every note he played carried that history, that weight, and that truth. Audiences could feel it. They responded not only to the technical skill, but to the authenticity of his performance, the life behind the music. He began to notice subtle changes in himself as well. Confidence grew, not arrogance, but a quiet assurance. He realized that he could embrace both parts of his life, the responsible father, the dedicated worker, and the musician who had been waiting patiently in the shadows. He learned to navigate attention with grace, to respond to admiration with gratitude, and to continue performing without losing himself. The theater itself became a hub of excitement and inspiration. Visitors came not just to see the performances, but to witness the man who had been overlooked for so long. His story spread, inspiring others to pursue their hidden talents, to hold on to dreams even in the face of responsibility, and to recognize the extraordinary in everyday people. Teachers, parents, students, and musicians alike found hope in his journey, even as his life changed. He maintained his routines. He still swept the floors, still cleaned the theater, still cared for his child with unwavering dedication. But now, he did so with a renewed sense of purpose. Every action, every choice, was infused with the knowledge that talent and hard work could coexist, that dreams could be pursued alongside duty, and that recognition could arrive even in unexpected ways. He began teaching his child small pieces on the piano, sharing what he had learned over the years. Their bond deepened, strengthened by music and shared experience. It was no longer just a lesson in notes and keys, but a lesson in patience, perseverance, and hope. The child watched with wide eyes, absorbing not only the music, but the story of a parent who had never given up, who had carried on quietly until the world finally noticed. Performances began to take on new meaning. Each time he sat at the piano, he felt the weight of his journey, the struggles he had overcome, and the people who had supported him along the way. Music was no longer just a private passion. It had become a bridge connecting him to the world, allowing others to see, hear, and feel his story. In small moments between rehearsals and performances, he reflected on how far he had come. The janitor who had once moved through shadows was now recognized, respected, and celebrated. The man who had feared attention now understood that it was not something to dread, but something to embrace with humility. He realized that life had a way of revealing what mattered most when the time was right. The public's fascination was not fleeting. Letters, messages, and invitations continued to arrive. People shared stories of how his music had inspired them to return to their own passions, to rediscover talents they had abandoned, or to face challenges with renewed courage. The impact of his performances extended far beyond the theater, reaching homes, schools, and hearts across the community and beyond. Through it all, he remained grounded. He knew that life was still full of responsibilities and challenges. Bills had to be paid, meals had to be prepared, and schoolwork had to be supervised. Yet he also knew that music, and the recognition that came with it, had transformed his perspective. He could embrace both duty and passion, finding balance in a world that had once seemed rigid and limiting. And so, each day, he returned to the theater with a renewed sense of purpose. He swept the floors, cleaned the seats, and tended to the space with care. But now, when he approached the piano, he did so without hesitation or fear. The keys were no longer a symbol of lost dreams, but a portal to possibility, a reminder that life could surprise even those who had long given up hope. Through the growing attention, the unexpected fame, and the admiration of countless people, he remained true to himself. He had learned that recognition was valuable not for its own sake, but for the way it illuminated the quiet courage, dedication, and resilience that had always been part of him. And in that truth, he found a sense of peace, fulfillment. The day started like any other, with the usual early morning routine. He arrived at the theater carrying his cleaning supplies, moving quietly through the halls as he had for years. The lights were dim, the stage empty, and the familiar smell of polished wood and dust greeted him like an old companion. Yet, unlike previous mornings, there was an undercurrent of anticipation he could feel but could not name. He began sweeping the floor, his hands moving with the practiced rhythm that came from years of routine. Every movement was deliberate, steady, almost meditative. As he worked, he noticed a group of people gathered near the entrance. They were staff, performers, and some visitors who had arrived early. Drawn by the video that had circulated online, word had spread even further than he realized. People wanted to see him, the man whose talent had amazed so many. For a moment, he froze. The thought of performing in front of an audience, even a small one, brought a flutter of nerves he had not felt in years. He had played privately, hesitated over opportunities, and slowly begun to accept recognition. But now, with eyes upon him, the reality of being truly seen brought both excitement and fear. He glanced at the grand piano in the center of the stage. Its polished surface reflected the light, gleaming like it had been waiting for this moment. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself, and sat down. His fingers hovered above the keys, feeling the familiar texture, remembering the movements, the pressure, the flow. For years, this had been part of him that no one else knew. Now, it was about to be shared. The first note he struck was soft, almost hesitant, but as the sound filled the empty space, he felt confidence return. The music grew, rising and falling, carrying with it the emotions of a lifetime. He played with care, skill, and honesty. Every chord spoke of sacrifice, endurance, and love. Every melody carried the weight of sleepless nights, early mornings, and the quiet moments spent dreaming of something more. People began to move closer, drawn in by the sound. The audience grew, filling the theater in a way he had never experienced. Some watched quietly, holding their breath as if afraid to break the spell. Others leaned forward, captivated by the beauty of the music and the depth of feeling it conveyed. There was a reverence in the room, an unspoken acknowledgement that they were witnessing something extraordinary. He did not notice them at first. He was lost in the music, in the rhythm, the harmony, the expression. It was as though the piano had become an extension of himself, translating the silent stories of his life into sound. The hours of labor, the quiet sacrifices, the sleepless nights, they all came alive in those notes. The audience could feel it, though they did not know the details. They could sense the honesty, the passion, the humanity in every movement. As he played, a few people began recording discreetly, capturing the moment to share with others who could not be present. Yet, unlike the first viral video, this time he did not mind. He understood that the music was larger than himself. It belonged not only to him, but to anyone willing to listen and be moved by it. The sound connected him to strangers, friends, and family alike, creating an invisible thread of shared experience. The first piece ended, and the room was silent for a moment. He looked up, and for the first time, he truly saw the faces before him. There was awe in their eyes, curiosity, admiration, and something else, recognition. They saw him not just as a janitor, not just as a single father, but as a person with talent, courage, and a story that demanded to be heard. Then, applause began, soft at first, tentative. He looked around, startled, and then the sound grew, swelling into a wave of appreciation. Hands clapped, some people stood, some smiled with tears glistening in their eyes. It was overwhelming, but it was sincere. It was recognition in its purest form, not just for the music, but for the life that had created it. A reporter who had come to cover the story approached him. "We want to know your story," she said gently. "People need to hear how you got here." He hesitated, unsure if he was ready to put words to years of sacrifice, struggle, and hope. But then he realized that this was the moment, not for fame, not for praise, but for truth, for others to see that resilience, talent, and humanity can exist quietly in someone's life until the right moment arrives. He began speaking softly, recounting the years of work, the nights of worry, and the dreams that had never left him. He spoke of becoming a single parent, of the responsibilities that had required him to put aside music for decades. He spoke of his child, of the small joys that had kept him going, of the determination to provide and protect. Every word resonated. Every sentence revealed a man who had endured more than most could imagine, and yet had never lost his dignity or his passion. The audience listened intently. Some nodded, some whispered softly to each other, and some wiped tears from their eyes. They had come to see a performance, but they received something deeper, a glimpse into a life of quiet heroism, persistence, and undying hope. His story was more than talent. It was a testament to human strength. After sharing his story, He returned to the piano. This time, the music was different. It carried not only his personal emotions, but the collective energy of everyone present. Each note seemed to echo the admiration, respect, and understanding he now felt from those around him. The music became a dialogue between himself and the audience, a conversation that transcended words, reaching straight into hearts. As he played, more people arrived, drawn by the growing buzz. Local journalists, visitors, and even performers who had heard about the story joined the audience. The theater that had once been quiet, a place of routine and shadows, was now alive with energy, emotion, and connection. He noticed smiles, tears, and people leaning forward, fully absorbed. Every chord reached them. Every melody touched them. A few minutes into his set, a small child approached him quietly, holding the hand of a parent. The child's eyes were wide with wonder, and he could see the recognition of possibility in their gaze. The child had never heard anything like this before, had never known that such beauty could come from a person who seemed ordinary on the outside. It reminded him of his own child, of the wonder he had once carried in his own eyes when first discovering music. After finishing another piece, the audience erupted in applause again. This time, it was louder, more heartfelt. Some people stood, others clapped for several minutes without pause. He felt the weight of it all, the recognition, the validation, the humanity in the room, and yet he remained humble. The applause was not for him alone, he realized, but for the story, for the life behind the music, for the courage it took to play despite all obstacles. The director of the theater approached, his expression a mix of pride and awe. "I can't believe I didn't know," he said softly. "All these years, and you've been right here, hidden in plain sight." The man smiled, acknowledging the truth without bitterness. Recognition was new, yes, but it was also humbling. He had always known his worth, even when no one else did. Now, the world was finally seeing it. By the afternoon, the theater was packed. People who had heard about the story from news articles, social media, and word of mouth came to witness him for themselves. The janitor who had once been invisible was now at the center of attention, not because he sought it, but because he had earned it through a lifetime of quiet courage. The energy in the room was electric, a shared acknowledgement of the extraordinary emerging from the ordinary. Even as the day went on, he continued to play with humility and grace. Each note was intentional, each melody a reflection of his journey. He noticed the faces in the audience, their expressions of admiration, their connection to the music, and he felt a sense of responsibility. Music was no longer just for himself. It was for the people who had come to witness, to understand, and to be inspired. After the final piece, the room erupted in applause once more. People came forward, offering handshakes, hugs, and words of gratitude. They wanted to know more about the man behind the music, to understand the years of dedication that had led to this moment. He spoke quietly, sharing his story with honesty and simplicity, never exaggerating, never seeking sympathy, only truth. By evening, the story had reached far beyond the theater. News outlets, social media channels, and local communities were abuzz. People shared clips of his performance, told others about the humble single father who had amazed everyone with his talent, and celebrated the perseverance that had brought him to this moment. His life, once quiet and unnoticed, had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary power of dedication. As he finally left the theater that evening, hands still tingling from the music, he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. Recognition was no longer foreign or frightening. It was simply the natural acknowledgement of a life lived with courage, sacrifice, and authenticity. The world had seen him, and in doing so, had seen what it meant to endure, to dream, and to rise from quiet invisibility into light. He walked home slowly, the city lights reflecting softly on the pavement. He carried with him the warmth of applause, the admiration of strangers, and the understanding that his journey had been worth every challenge, every sleepless night, every sacrifice. Music had reclaimed its place in his life, not as a dream deferred, but as a living, breathing part of him that would continue to grow, inspire, and connect. For the first time in years, he felt